Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of React Wednesdays. My name is TJ Van Tol. I work as a developer advocate on the Kendo React team at Progress. And with me, as always, is Dan Wilson.
Hey, I'm Dan Wilson. I work with Digital Primates. We do enterprise React consulting. We also curate the enterprise React newsletter. So if you like React and you like enterprise stuff, go ahead and subscribe. We never sell your email address.
And our special guest today is Julian. And Julian, we're going to have to ask you to pronounce your last name again. And also tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you do, that sort of thing.
My name is Julian Gonggrijp, which you can try to pronounce as Gonggrijp. I'm a part-time scientific developer at Utrecht University. And I'm also a part-time volunteer open source developer. And I'm here because of Underscore.
Nice. Cool. Fun fact, when I was in about 20 years ago, I wanted to move to Utrecht because they had such a great electronic dance scene. The paperwork at the time was very, very intimidating, but I could have been your neighbor.
Nice to know. I was very young back then.
Yeah.
Well, I know we want to talk about Underscore. So why don't you give everybody here like a little bit of a background? There's probably some people watching here that maybe aren't even familiar with what Underscore is, maybe what the project is, where it's at today, and sort of how you got involved with contributing towards it.
Yeah, so Underscore is, I consider it kind of a missing standard library for JavaScript. You know, when you come from Python or C++, there's this large library of algorithms that you can just use off the shelf. And JavaScript is kind of Spartanic compared to the languages like those. So it is this big collection of generic functions that you can use for all kinds of stuff. It's also actually a very small and compact, elegant little library written in literate code. So reading it can actually be quite instructive. And apart from there being a collection of functions, there's also a little bit of magic, which I'll demonstrate in a bit. Oh, and maybe some history. It appeared in 2009. So it's one of the older libraries out there. And one of its major fork, LoDash, is also very well known.
So I'm curious how you got involved in terms of, because I know you want to talk about modularizing Underscore a little bit, which interested me because like I had always considered it to be at least a little bit modular, right? Because it's sort of designed Underscore is basically just a whole bunch of functions, right? You can pick or choose. So what sort of work did you do was it just making it easier to consume just individual functions with like less of an impact on your file size? Or maybe could you walk us through like a high level overview of the approach you took? And maybe I know you want to show some of this as well.
Yes. So what I wanted to do is create a kind of a variant of Underscore. I'll get into why I wanted to do that later, but I realized that Underscore at the time was a single bundle, a single file. And if you wanted to create something that is like Underscore, but not quite, then you'd have to fork the project. And that's exactly what happened with LoDash. But at the time, I was frustrated because there was LoDash and there was Underscore. And usually, many libraries depend on either of those. So if you use several libraries in your web application or your server application, then it is likely that you'll depend on both. And I wanted to avoid that. So I didn't want to fork Underscore. I wanted to create a project that is like Underscore by depending on it instead of forking it. And I realized that in order to do that, and I think I should show my slides.
Yeah.
So in order to do that, I needed tiny modules. I needed to split the project into tiny modules in order to optimize code reuse. Because the status was you have your app or your library and it depends on Underscore. And if you want to do anything, then you always had to import the entire project. And I realized this was also a thing for other people. There were actually 2 issues at the time that people wanted to have ECMAScript modules, the new standard modules for JavaScript. So I wanted to have this.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to have the project split into tiny modules so that you can say, well, I will use only a small part. Give me just this. And then you get a smaller bundle, and it's less of a deterrent for people to reuse the code that is already in there.
I'm curious too, is like, I mean, I'm sure you're going to get into this, but like, what are the specific steps of getting to this point? Like, because how smart are like bundlers today of doing this for you, like automatically, if you just needed to pick out one function out of a big library like this?
Yeah, well, they are a bit smart, but because of the magic that is involved in underscore, which I think I should demonstrate for a moment. Let me show you. So underscore, it's not just a collection of functions. So people might know map and do like and square every number in an array or something.
Yep.
But underscore is also a special function. So when you import underscore, you get a special object which has the name underscore. And you can say like, put something in a special wrapper. And then, oh, just show what's in there. So now it's a special object. If I can unwrap it. So suppose I wrap the number 1 with the underscore function, then and now I cast it to a number, then I unwrap it again. I can also unwrap it explicitly.
It's funny. I've been using underscore for a long time. I had no idea you could do this.
Now you know. Now you know. So this is a reason also why I'll get to this, but this is also a reason why you can't just tree shake the thing, because this special underscore function, it's not just a collection of functions, but it is a function itself.
Yeah.
And it needs to have all these members, which are these. So you can also chain. This is not a very good example. That's an array in there. And
actually, could you bump up the terminal font size just like 1 or 2 notches?
Oh, yes, of course. Oops. See.
It's not that small, so if it ends up being a hassle, it's all right. Oh yeah, that works. That's plenty big enough.
Like that?
Yep.
So
I think my next question when you're done with this is, I'm curious why, like, considering I didn't even know underscore did this, I'm curious why it does this too.
Well, of course, back in the time when there were only UMB bundles, when you didn't have ECMAScript modules, you were kind of forced to have a single object that contained everything in the library.
Yeah.
So like jQuery.
For example, like jQuery, it has this $ symbol, which is also a special function. So people thought, well, we can only export one thing, and when we have more, we make those properties of that one thing. But that one thing can be a function and can be useful. So let's use that. So that's how this originated. And well, for now, maybe chain would just be a standalone function if you were to start over, but you would still need to return something that you can chain on more functions.
True.
So you need some kind of special objects. Anyway, so it might as well be this underscore object, which is the default export actually.
Yep, that makes sense.
So yeah, now I'm kind of wondering what happens when you decompose all this, but I'm sure you're going to get to that.
What do you mean by decompose?
Well, when you split everything up into smaller functions, like do you still have the ability to write code like that chain map size value piece?
That's actually I wanted to demonstrate, because suppose you have your own really regular functions, like a square function, which just returns the square of something, and maybe an add function, and which you can also, it's really easy to compose this with functions from underscore. So you could say sum is so now when I take the sum of something, it will give me 6. If I want to add these functions to underscore, I can just do it. Oh, I should assign that, because otherwise it's going to give me a really large return value. You don't need to assign the result of mixin usually, but here in the node read eval print loop, it's going to output a lot of
you'll clutter up your console.
Yeah. So I'm trying to avoid that. So I can do this. And now I can do chain map square dot sum. Sum is usually not there in underscore, but I've just added it. Can also do it the other way around.
Yeah, that's pretty slick.
So that's the magic of the underscore object. You can just mix in your own regular functions, and all this chaining stuff and the mixing, it all works right away. But I was still able to do it with modules. I didn't need to tear apart anything, because the internal standard functions from underscore itself are written in this way as well. They are just regular functions that take some arguments and return a value. And the chaining magical stuff and the wrapper, that's all layered on top of it from the outside. So maybe I should show some of that. Here is underscore itself. Well, I would already dive into how I did the modularization itself, I think.
Yeah.
At the right time? Or should I explain a bit? No, we were talking about tree shaking. So if you take just the functions, because you can start with just the functions, then you have a module with, well, basically something that exports a plain object with all those functions as members. You could tree shake that, but to save space, some of the functions in underscore are generated from other functions. They are basically return values of expressions. And it makes it very hard for analyzers like Webpack and rollup to understand which function calls are going to have side effects and which aren't. And then for safety, it leaves everything in. So when you try to put everything in one module and you just try to tree shake, then about a third of the library will just stay in the water wet.
Yeah, it makes sense because it's sort of an edge case for what those bundlers are really accustomed to, where you might just pick out a very clear function with a very clear return value. So I could see how this, like building on top of each other, could actually make that whole algorithm harder.
Yeah, it's really hard. Tree shaking in JavaScript in general is really hard. Tree shaking underscore is probably a bit harder still. So yeah. So how did I get into modularizing this? So there were already issue tickets at the underscore repository at the time, and people even offered to do it, at least converting it to ECMAScript module syntax. But these people didn't get to it, and then I thought, well, I'll offer to take over. And they said, like, sure, go ahead, please do.
The joy of open source.
Yeah, it's all open source, and I did it, and it was well received. And then it went in 2 steps. First, I just changed the notation to ECMAScript modules, and then initially Jeremy Ashkenaz, the creator of underscore, was a bit hesitant about splitting everything into modules because, as you can see here on the left of my screen, this is really, the code is written like a story. You can read it top to bottom. This is the code back at the day when we didn't convert it yet. And well, I'm scrolling too fast for the people at home to read along, but it's really written like a story. And he was like, well, if you're going to split that, will it still be like that? And I was able to convince him that if you take care, you can make it come out like a single story again using a build tool like rollup. So that's what I did. So I'll show how I did that. So the first step.
I'm curious what that means, though, when you say read it like a story. Like, what's the benefit to that, and who gets the benefit?
Anyone who wants to understand how underscore works, because there is this magic which I just showed you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read the code, you take some time to ingest it. It's really elegant because this mixin function is just one of the functions. It's all the way at the bottom of the file, at least originally it was. And you just take all these functions, which are totally regular functions, nothing special about them, and you add some magic on top, and suddenly you have chaining. And well, you have to read it for yourself to really appreciate it. But I can tell you, it's kind of enlightening to read it.
So there was a lot of care taken to sort of structure this in a way to help others learn from it.
Yes. Yes.
Looks like there's a substantial amount of comments here. So someone cared enough to describe their work in plain language.
Yes, and he also wrote Doco, which is annotated literate code generator. So if you look carefully, you see bits of markdown syntax scattered around. You can actually turn this kind of inside out, where it is a document with inline code examples. And that's also on the underscore website. And we can, after the modularization, we can still generate that. And actually, we now also have a modular version where you can click the module references from the imports, which I'm quite proud of. So definitely check that out. I'll show how I converted this. So here's a relatively well-known one, I think, for each, this function.
Yep.
So before the conversion in version 1.9 of underscore, there was this way of defining the functions that are exported by underscore by saying, well, you assign a property to the underscore object. And again, it's a regular function, just a function with parameters that return something. And then all the way at the end, it would call mixin, and it would put all the properties that were already assigned to the underscore object and add the magic to them. So if you convert this to ECMAScript modules, it becomes something like this. You don't need that semicolon anymore. And then because there is an alias, you would also do something like this. If I'm going too fast, please tell me.
Nope.
So of course, I wouldn't do this for every function separately because there are more than 100. But with a little bit of search and replace and using some regular expressions, it was done quite easily. I won't go into how to do that because that's a bit involved. So I can skip forward and show you how it looks like in version 1.10, which we released in March.
Yeah, I'm curious if I'm surprised that all these functions were defined in a single file. Did you move this out to like one file per function sort of thing, or is it all still in one place?
Yeah, so it started out as everything in one file, which was a single read, which was really part of the philosophy. And at this stage, when I was going to convert it to ECMAScript module syntax, it was still all in one file, except I needed to add 2 more modules to add the magic. I'll discuss that in a bit. So if I fast forward to, I should probably undo this to not confuse Git. Oops. My editor is a bit confused now. Let's see what I think.
Could like just git reset it. Yeah.
Yeah.
When in doubt.
And I'm with you, Julian. I would always rather spend 6 hours writing the correct regular expression than 6 hours copy and pasting.
Oh, it didn't take 6 hours.
Reminds me of the old XKCD comic. I might have to look this up, where it talks about like when should you automate something, and it's got like a whole like, because it's like I feel like that's every developer's dilemma. It's like, well, dang it, like this monotonous task would take me 3 hours. Like, can I automate it in less than that? Is it worth it? Those are always fun. Let me see if I can find it.
It's always a guess, you know. But there's something satisfying about automation, creating something automated.
So a step I failed to mention just now is that, of course, I also took off the UMD wrapper because it was a UMD module. People were trying to support multiple module systems at the same time, so AMD or CommonJS or browser globals. So the first thing I did was just remove that wrapper, which was on the outside here, and lower the indentation level. And then, as I just showed you, I converted everything to export notation. So this export, and it was still all in one file, which is this index.js file, which I'm in. And except that I needed to add 2 modules, one to integrate everything. So I'm using this index module as, well, if I import star, I get a plain object that has all the all the functions as methods. That's this all exports object. And then I also import mixin. And then I just say mix in all exports. And now you get the real magic underscore object again. That's how I recreated the default export. And then also for this new ECMAScript module syntax, there's also named exports, which are not inside the default export, but next to it. So I added one more module, and it just exports the defaults, which is the magic underscore object, and also all the names separately.
So is there a file in here that's just going to list all of the functions then? Is that what's in the index like default? Because somewhere here it's got to have just like a list of all the functions, right?
Yeah, so that's actually what's been generated by rollup. So it recreates this UMD bundle for us. Now
Okay.
it is wrapped in an immediately invoked function expression. And then all the way at the bottom, there is this big list which it just generates for us.
Okay. So I'm curious with this setup, what about this makes it more like bundling friendly? Is it because now that there's like a clear spot in this for where each of these functions are defined? Like, is there going to be is it basically if you upgrade underscore between these two versions, are you going to be, and you're using like, let's say 4 underscore functions at random, will your file size be smaller depending on the bundler you're using because of this architecture?
It depends whether you import from the UMD bundle or from this index.js file. So this index.js file, that's the real source file, which has all the functions as standalone exports. If you export from this file, import from this file instead of the bundle, then you get tree shaking. And for example, I tried map, and it reduced the size of a bundle to about half of underscore. So you can get rid of about half of underscore. But map itself is actually only 1/6 of underscore. So you're getting this 1/3 of underscore, which rollup or Webpack just can't tree shake.
Yeah, I see. And actually, too, I'm curious why rollup instead of, I feel like actually last week on React Wednesdays, we had Zane on to talk about like different bundlers. So I'm curious, like, what is there a reason rollup was the choice you made or the underscore project made versus, I mean, Webpack, Parcel, right? There's probably 20 of them nowadays.
I didn't know about Parcel at the time, so I don't know how that would go. I considered rollup mostly because Jeremy already mentioned rollup as an acceptable option. And also because my own experience with Webpack was less positive, especially the code that was output was a bit messier than the code that rollup would output.
Interesting.
Maybe if I retried with Webpack, it would work out better. I don't know. I didn't try, but if I show you the output from rollup again, I think you can be quite happy because it looks very much like the original underscore UMD bundle. It's just the same code with the same code comments interspersed.
Yeah, it's pretty elegant, actually, surprisingly.
It's very elegant. It's almost the same thing, actually. So that's at least the experience with rollup was so positive that I saw no reason to change. But of course, it might be even better with another tool. I don't know.
Yeah, you never know. I guess I'm surprised that the comment stayed in here. Was that a choice, or is that something that rollup prefers?
it is both something that we prefer and something that rollup does under some conditions. So that did require some attention. You need to put the comment directly above the function in order to have it included. If there is a line in between, like this, then it might drop it. And I think I also, it matters a bit which version you're using. So I had to take some care there.
And of course, if you were going to ship this to production, you could use some kind of process to strip out the comments and minify and things of that nature.
We create a minified version, but we don't want to strip out the comments. The unminified version needs to have the comments. It needs to be this readable story. So that's really a desire for us.
I'm curious, because I know one thing you wanted to chat about too is the best way to use underscore today. Because I assume underscore still supports, like you said, you still have the UMD wrapper out there. I imagine the project is used, like one thing I think about with underscore is I'm guessing to this day, it's probably one of the most downloaded JavaScript projects out there, because I run across it absolutely everywhere. But I'm assuming you have the preferred way of using it is it's to use, like you said, to point at the specific file. Like, what does it actually look like? Is it npm install and then just like import function names from underscore, or what's like sort of the happy path or your preferred path for using underscore?
So I should probably skip to version 1.11 because that is 11, because that's actually the modularized version. This is still the version before modularization.
Okay.
So let's skip forward.
And while you're doing that, we've been finding Fargrim in the chat and me have been finding some of these XKCD comics about productivity. So they're pretty fun to look at.
So this index module, which I just showed you, has changed to basically a bunch of re-exports where each function is coming from a different module. So each has moved to the HJS module, which looks like this.
Yeah, there's the giant list of files I was expecting to see.
Yeah, so there are about like 150 of them or something like that.
Yeah.
Really lots. So each function is in a different module, and each one is a default export. And there is a reason for that, because if it would be a named export, then you would have to do, and you want to use it in like Node with the old-fashioned CommonJS module system, then it would look like this.
Oh, you're saying so without the default export, it would look like that.
If you were using named exports, you would have to take each property out of the thing you're requiring.
So
yeah. With default exports, it's much more elegant. And also it's more flexible because you leave people the choice to give it a different name. And it also centralizes the naming into your index module. So now in this index module, we can say, well, the thing that we're importing from this module, let's name it each and for each. And the thing we're importing from the map module, that's called map and collect. And that gives us a central place to arrange all the aliases, because lots of functions in underscore have 2 names or 3. That's just history.
Why is that?
I think it's just history. It's also because something like reduce, I think in C++ it's called accumulate. In Python it's called reduce, and in Haskell it's called fold. So to make it recognizable for everyone, after all, this is the missing functional utility library. for JavaScript.
Right.
So to make it recognizable for people who come from other languages or who know other languages as well, some of these functions have multiple names. Not all of them. So here are a lot of only one name.
I'm curious too. This is changing topics a little bit, but it's something I'm sort of interested. Like when underscore started, a lot of these functions weren't built into JavaScript, but since then, like ECMAScript has sort of picked up some of these, right? Like for each map and such are built in. How many of these like do some of these functions now just like return whatever the standard spec is now for legacy purposes, or do you know if there's any plans to like take out some of these functions because now they're sort of built in, or how familiar are you with like the library's approach to all of that?
Yeah, so you hear sentiments like these, like, oh, JavaScript has map now, so you don't need underscore. No, because, for example, if you can apply map to an object.
It's funny, Christian in chat is saying the same thing. He's map objects.
Yeah. Or for example, arguments objects, or, well, basically anything that looks like an object or an array. Also, this is true of many functions in underscore that have something like it in this is a trick you can't do with vanilla.js.
Oh man.
So basically, the answer is most of the functions in underscore are still not in JavaScript itself. And the ones that are much less powerful. So I would say underscore has still a lot to offer that is not just there in JavaScript.
Yeah, I'm with got some those are some cool examples to just pull out from random. I didn't even know that it took my brain about 10 seconds to interpret what was happening in that last one, but I could also see how that would be super useful in certain contexts also. Like, because if you wrote it without that, like the way my brain would approach that would be a lot more code.
Yes.
Mine too.
Yeah,
like
well,
I could get that done, but I would get that done in about 10 lines of code where I'm like splitting everything out and such.
you can actually, with modern JavaScript, you can try to keep it at a minimum in this case. But I think this is easier. Yeah. And this is still very trivial. So there are also more.
Yeah, it's readable too, because it took me a second to parse it, but it's not like confusing, because there's some, I mean, there are some developers too that like to write things in one line of code that should not be written in one line of code, right? Because that always happens too. But
yeah,
this is still like, I understand what underscore is doing from the syntax, so it's not like just esoteric either.
Yeah, that's very legible. If you change the ternary operator 7 times, you're doing the wrong thing.
Actually, I've made the case for nested ternary. There's a way to do it in an okay way.
Send your code over to me for code review.
It used to be in the jQuery project. There were points where I could dig up the source. I wrote a blog post on this, Dan. I can convince you.
I do want to see it.
You do?
I like terse code. As long as it's obvious terse code. One question that's coming to my mind is, you had this library and it's a very substantial library, and then you break it apart into sub pieces, let's call it. There seems like there's so many possible dependencies and permutations. What was the testing process like? How did you know that your work was complete?
Underscore already had a very extensive unit test suite. So I just kept that as is. I didn't change anything about the tests, and I kept running them over and over out of kind of a paranoia, I think. And at most stages, things kept working, and when they didn't, I fixed it. And I also added some tests to check that tree shaking improved, because with this setup, with all the tiny modules, you actually only get the code that you need. And I was able to confirm that with additional tests. So that's basically what I did. Just keep testing over and over. And the tests were already there, fortunately.
You know, we did a show recently about unit testing, and it was pretty good. And I still feel like in the developer community, some folks are just not sold that unit tests are valuable. Just as an interesting thought exercise, like imagine you chose to take on this work, and also imagine there were no unit tests. What would the process have been like?
I would start by making unit tests.
Fair enough. That's a fair point. I really think that's a great answer, because with a library like this, where there's so many different ways you can use it, you know, having a contract that says, you know, when these things happen, this is the outcome, that's sort of there up front. You know, you just have to meet that with your work, and then you know you've completed it. Otherwise, it just would be mind-boggling. And personally, I would be very fearful of breaking apart a library like this without solid unit tests.
I agree.
So we have a good question in the chat, but first I'm going to paste in, here you go, Dan, written by previous React Wednesdays guest, Eric Elliott. Nested ternaries are great. So you can read through that and join the cult if you'd like. I'm going to die on this hill. It's my unpopular opinion of choice, but you can read through that later.
Will do.
And then we do have a question on the chat. Is your ES module package compatible with Node's new native ES module implementation?
Is the bundle, or is the, sorry, I didn't read it. Package. Yes. So no. The answer is no. So there's this Node experimental feature of supporting ECMAScript modules. And I'm emphasizing experimental because, to be honest, it's not exactly convenient if you're trying to be backwards compatible, which is kind of important for an 11-year-old library. So if you want to support ECMAScript modules, but you also want to continue supporting CommonJS modules and AMD modules and browser globals, then the only thing that kind of works is naming all the modules .mjs, which is really awkward, I think. So I decided to hold off on this and hope that maybe this will be a bit more easy to do. You can do quite radical things, like declare that your library is ECMAScript module based, but then you basically just break compatibility for other module systems. There's also a very restrictive way of defining which modules are which type, but I'm offering AMD and CommonJS versions of all the individual modules as well. And I'm afraid that wouldn't work. So what you can do is use the ESM package, which is a NPM package on the registry. And that lets you just mix CommonJS and ECMAScript modules imports in one file even, and that will work just without a problem. It's also free of dependencies, so it doesn't add too much to your dependency list. So for the time being, I recommend that. And maybe in the future, Underscore will go with the native support in Node.js. But we don't only cater to Node.js, we also cater to the browser and to if you do more exotic environments like extend scripts. So
yeah, I feel like this is like the modern version of like what used to be AMD versus CommonJS versus just browser globals. And I feel like in Underscore has to support all of these because it's been around for a while and has legacy uses. But I'm guessing a lot of like utility libraries today would probably not include like the AMD type wrappers would be my guess, because I can't imagine there's a whole lot of demand for that in new projects, or maybe I'm wrong.
it also depends on whether you want to be able, you know, some web applications still need to run in Internet Explorer 11 because that's still used a lot in corporate environments. So if you want your library to be available right from the browser without transpilation or something,
yeah,
then you need to support that kind of environment.
True.
Yeah.
You know, we've spoken about this a bit, and we maybe even touched on it a little bit as well. But given that the library is 13 years old, and many JavaScript developers are not at that point in their career, they're coming in with 1-2 years experience. What do you wish that they knew about Underscore that you think that they may not?
Well, of course, I don't know what people don't know, but if I have to pick something, I think what I would like people to know is that that Underscore is like the missing standard library for JavaScript. It's full of these things that you need in, I think, nearly every application. For example, taking the maximum of something, or taking a particular property out of an array of objects, or partitioning a list into two kinds of things. You need to do that all the time, and you don't need Underscore anymore because there is map in JavaScript. It's not true. Yeah, so I think what I really want people to realize, and that's not even really specific about Underscore, but try to reuse code. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't fork. Use the libraries that are already there, because it saves so much work. We can collaborate as a planet and always use the work that was already done instead of doing it over.
Yeah, I like that too, especially considering like how modular this is. Like, this isn't going to be a huge footprint on your app, right? You're taking, like, in this case with your optimizations, like you're plucking like individual function implementations out. This is going to be like a tiny blip on your actual thing that you're shipping to your users. Because I think JavaScript developers, front-end developers can sometimes get a little bit too obsessed with saving the amount of code they ship, and they get worried about kilobytes here and there in these different libraries, and don't think about the fact that they're shipping like hundreds of kilobytes worth of images and whatnot in their apps as well.
Yeah, so even if you are not selective with Underscore, it's less than 8 kilobytes.
Yeah.
So
that's nothing, really.
It's nothing.
You could shave a JPEG at 1% more and get that back.
But well, you know, every byte saved counts, you could say, if you care a lot about energy use, which I think is something to say for. Take care of the environment. You can. We have modules. So yeah.
Well, this has been super interesting stuff. Is there anything that we've got to or anything that we've missed? And I'd also toss this out the chat. If you have any final questions, things you want to ask Julian, now is a good chance to get in those final questions as well. But have we covered our basis here? Is there anything else you could think of that we haven't touched on that you want to mention?
I think there was something we touched but didn't get into, which is the best way to use this. And I can show 2 slides about this.
Yeah, it'd be a good note to end on.
So we ended with this picture. And if you go this route, if you go like, well, I just import map, and you have dependencies that use the whole underscore object, it's a special magical object that can do chaining and stuff, then you basically have 2 copies of map in your application. So it's actually going to grow your code size instead of reducing it. That's something to keep in mind. So what you could do is create a custom underscore. And that basically means that you replace this index module that I just showed you by your own index module, where you just list the functions that you want to have. It can include your own functions as well. You can skip some of the functions from underscore. And as long as you take care to include all the functions that your dependencies use, you can create an alternative underscore, which might be smaller and might even include some of your own functions. So you can configure your build tool to replace all imports of underscore by your custom version. And then all your dependencies will also use your custom smaller version of underscore. So that's what I recommend.
Do you have that written up anywhere too? Like if we wanted to drop a link, is that like in the underscore documentation, or do you have like a blog post if people wanted to read about that?
Yeah, you can read all about it in my in the article that I wrote about the new modular version of underscore.
Perfect.
And maybe you can we show that in on the screen or something?
Yeah, your screen is still up if you want to bring it up. I'm trying to find the link myself so I can drop it
Let me see.
in the chat as well.
Here it is. So the link, I'll copy it.
Yeah, and Dan got it for me too, so I'm going to drop it in the chat for anybody that wants to. Yeah, there we go. So it's in the chat now as well, if you want to look through that. Very cool. And I haven't seen any other questions come in chat other than the ones that we've already tackled. So I'm just looking to make sure. So I think we can start to wrap things up. This was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about underscore, and I really appreciated actually your skills at pulling off some of those functions on the fly, like showing what map can do, was pretty cool and pretty impressive.
Thank you.
I know one thing we'd like to end on is just a handful of just picks or any recommendations that you might have. If you don't, that's okay as well. Dan, you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, I'll mention our Enterprise React newsletter, and that's actually the way that we found out about Julian and his work. Our software developers submit all the articles, and so it's by developers for developers.
Julian, do you have anything you want to pick, or you could even just drop like any place that people might want to contact you or follow you if they have any additional questions?
Yeah, so I mentioned previously that I wanted to create kind of a variant of underscore. And that's because I was running into this situation where you have dependencies that depend on underscore and some that depend on LoDash, which is a fork of underscore. So I wanted to create a variant of underscore, a custom underscore, which includes all the aliases that are in LoDash, so that you can replace all imports of both underscore and LoDash in your application by that single library to save a lot of space. And because LoDash is actually quite large. And that's something I'm working on. I already have a working proof of concept on my computer. If you want to support that work, you can support me on Patreon. And I also have a Twitter account where you can follow me.
Do you have a name for this? Because I feel like if you're doing something with an underscore, like...
yeah, it's called underscore fusion.
Underscore fusion. I like that a lot.
I just dropped the links into the chat if you want to grab those.
Yeah, I'll drop in. I just dropped in the Twitter. And from my end, I'll just pick, we actually have a new website for React Wednesdays, so I'll drop that in the chat as well. So we have a new design that's kind of fun, so check that out. We have some new ways of looking at previous episodes, looking at upcoming ones. So we're taking a week off for the US Thanksgiving next week. And then the week after that, we have David K. Piano, David Khurshid. I'm probably butchering that. We only get people on here with hard to pronounce last names for Americans. That's actually one of our rules. All right, but check it out. But thanks again, Julian, for joining us. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Everybody appreciated it.
Thank you for having me.
And also, we've sold somebody with nested ternaries.
Another one bites the dust.
All right. See you, everybody.
Bye.